Dorothy Martinez had opinions about everything, from my housekeeping standards to my failure to provide her with grandchildren. The suggestion that I needed remedial business classes was particularly galling considering that I'd guest lectured at UT's business school just last month on digital transformation strategies for traditional industries. "I'll think about it," I said, grabbing my purse and checking my phone for any urgent messages from Lisa. My business partner and COO had been handling the final negotiations for the Pinnacle acquisition while I maintained my domestic facade. But deals of this magnitude required constant attention. The drive to Tyler and Amanda's house gave Kevin another opportunity to expound on his theories about my untapped potential. He'd clearly been thinking about this conversation all day, probably while sitting in another unproductive meeting at Pinnacle, preparing his latest attempt to mold me into the wife he thought I should become. "I was talking to Marcus Johnson from our HR department," Kevin said as we navigated the winding roads of our neighborhood. "His wife started a small consulting business from home 2 years ago. Nothing major, just helping local restaurants with their social media. But she's made it work because she approached it professionally, set boundaries, established clear goals, treated it like a real business instead of a hobby." The condescension in his voice was remarkable. Kevin genuinely believed he was offering helpful advice, completely unaware that the woman sitting next to him had closed more deals in the past month than his entire department managed in a quarter. Summit Digital Solutions had 3 offices, a team of specialists who commanded 6-figure salaries, and a client list that included Fortune 500 companies. But to Kevin, my success would only be valid if it followed his prescribed path and remained small enough not to threaten his sense of superiority. "Maybe Marcus could introduce you to his wife," Kevin continued, warming to his theme. "She could share some practical insights about building a sustainable side business. The key is realistic expectations, Rachel. Not everyone is cut out to build the next Amazon, but that doesn't mean you can't find fulfillment in a smaller venture." The Brooks house came into view, a sprawling contemporary structure that screamed new money and desperate status signaling. Tyler had clearly been doing well at Pinnacle, though not well enough to afford this place on a senior account manager's salary. I suspected Amanda's family money was subsidizing their lifestyle, though neither of them would ever admit it. Kevin, parked behind Tyler's new Tesla, another recent acquisition that he'd been showing off on social media for weeks. I could already hear the sound of laughter and splashing from the backyard, the soundtrack of another evening spent performing my role as Kevin's underachieving wife. "Remember what we talked about," Kevin said as we walked toward the front door. "Tyler's celebrating his promotion tonight. Let's keep the focus on positive things, not problems or complaints about your business challenges." The assumption that my business was full of problems and complaints was particularly ironic, considering that Summit Digital Solutions had just been named to Austin Business Journal's list of fastest-growing companies in Texas. But Kevin had no context for understanding real business success. His idea of achievement was a corporate promotion that came with a marginal salary increase and a slightly better office view. Amanda answered the door with the kind of enthusiasm that always seemed slightly performative, her smile bright enough to power the string lights draped around their patio. She was wearing a designer sundress that probably cost more than most. People's mortgage payments, her highlighted hair perfectly styled despite the humid Austin evening. "Rachel, Kevin!" She air-kissed us both with practiced precision. Come in. Tyler's been dying to share his news with everyone." The whole gang's here already. The whole gang consisted of Tyler and Amanda's carefully curated social circle, a collection of young professionals who measured their worth in job titles and luxury purchases. Kevin fit seamlessly into this world, his confidence and conventional success making him a natural participant in their ongoing competition for status and validation. I followed them through the house toward the backyard, mentally preparing for another evening of playing the role Kevin had created for me. The woman who tried her best but never quite measured up. The wife who needed guidance and gentle correction. The small business owner whose ventures were more hobby than serious enterprise. The irony was that most of these people worked in industries I understood better than they did. Tyler's promotion at Pinnacle was impressive to Kevin, but I knew exactly what that position entailed because I'd been studying the company's organizational structure for months. Senior Vice President of Client Relations at a mid-tier marketing agency was a nice title, but it came with responsibility for relationships that were already deteriorating due to Pinnacle's failure to adapt to digital market trends. "Rachel!" Tyler's voice boomed across the patio as we stepped outside. "Congratulations on the craft fair success. Kevin mentioned you had a really good weekend at the Barton Springs market." I'd actually spent that weekend in Dallas presenting Summit Digital Solutions' comprehensive rebranding proposal to the executive team at TechFlow Industries. It had been one of the most successful pitches of my career, resulting in our largest contract to date. But to maintain my cover story, I'd told Kevin I was selling jewelry at a local craft fair. "Thank you," I said, accepting the glass of wine. Amanda pressed into my hand. "It was a good experience." "That's the spirit." Tyler raised his beer in a mock toast. "Starting small and building from there. Every successful entrepreneur begins with humble origins." The patronizing tone was unmistakable, though Tyler seemed genuinely unaware of his condescension. These men had convinced themselves that their encouragement was supportive rather than insulting, that their advice was valuable rather than irrelevant. Kevin settled into his element immediately, congratulating Tyler on his promotion and launching into the kind of shop talk that excluded the wives from meaningful participation. Amanda and I were expected to chat about domestic topics, while the men discussed serious business matters, a division of labor that felt increasingly archaic with each passing month. "How's the jewelry business going?" Amanda asked, her tone suggesting polite interest rather than genuine curiosity. "I saw some of your pieces on Instagram. Very cute." Cute. As if my supposed craft business were a charming hobby rather than a serious endeavor. The real irony was that Summit Digital Solutions had just helped rebrand 3 jewelry companies, transforming their online presence and tripling their revenue within 6 months. I understood the jewelry industry better than most people who actually worked in it. "It's been steady," I replied, taking a sip of wine and watching Kevin gesticulate enthusiastically as he described some minor victory at his own job. "Learning. A lot about online marketing and customer engagement." "That's wonderful," Amanda said with the kind of automatic enthusiasm that suggested she wasn't really listening. "Tyler always says that having a creative outlet is so important for women. It keeps us balanced while our husbands focus on building their careers." The casual sexism in her comment was breathtaking, though Amanda clearly saw it as progressive rather than limiting. She'd bought into the same narrative that Kevin promoted, the idea that women's professional ambitions should remain secondary to their husband's success. As the evening progressed, I found myself observing the group dynamics with the analytical distance I usually reserved for studying market trends. Kevin was performing his role as the successful husband whose guidance had helped his wife find modest success in her small business venture. Tyler was basking in the attention that came with his promotion, clearly enjoying his moment as the evening's star. Amanda was playing the supportive wife who understood that her husband's career took priority while her own interests remained safely domestic. And I was playing the role I'd created for myself 4 years ago, the woman who tried hard but never quite achieved the success that came naturally to the men around her. The conversation eventually turned to future plans and aspirations, giving Kevin another opportunity to share his theories about my potential. He'd been developing these ideas all week, clearly, building toward this moment when he could present his vision for my improved trajectory in front of an audience. "Rachel's been thinking about taking some business classes," Kevin announced, his voice carrying the pride of a man who believed he'd solved a complex problem. "Dorothy found some great programs at the community college that focus on small business development and practical marketing skills. The suggestion that I needed remedial business education was particularly absurd, considering that I'd been invited to speak at 3 industry conferences this quarter." But Kevin's friends nodded approvingly, impressed by his thoughtful approach to nurturing his wife's modest ambitions. "That's brilliant," Tyler said, settling back into his chair with the confidence of someone whose advice was always welcome. "The fundamentals are so important, especially for someone starting from scratch. Rachel, you should really consider taking some accounting classes too. Understanding cash flow and profit margins will completely change how you approach your business." I nodded politely while internally calculating that Summit Digital Solutions' monthly profit margins exceeded Tyler's annual salary. The absurdity of receiving financial advice from someone whose company I was planning to acquire was almost too much to bear. "Kevin's been incredibly supportive," I said, playing my role perfectly. "I'm lucky to have someone who understands business strategy so well." The compliment pleased Kevin enormously. He straightened in his chair, clearly enjoying the recognition of his mentorship role. This was exactly the dynamic he'd envisioned when he'd first started offering his guidance 4 years ago. The successful man generously sharing his expertise with his grateful wife. "The key is setting realistic goals," Kevin continued, warming to his favorite theme. "Rachel has a tendency to dream big, which is wonderful, but she needs to focus on achievable milestones first. Build a solid foundation before thinking about expansion." The advice was sound in theory, but laughably inappropriate for my actual situation. Summit Digital Solutions had already built that solid foundation and expanded far beyond anything Kevin could imagine. We were currently negotiating partnerships with companies in 12 states and had received acquisition offers from 3 major corporations in the past 6 months. But Kevin's version of reality required me to be the struggling entrepreneur who needed his wisdom and guidance. Revealing my actual success would have undermined everything he believed about our relationship and his role in it. As the evening wound down and we prepared to leave, Tyler pulled Kevin aside for one final conversation about career strategy and networking opportunities. I found myself standing with Amanda by their pool, watching the underwater lights create shifting patterns in the chlorinated water. "You know," Amanda said, her voice slightly softened by wine and the late hour, "I really admire what you're doing with your business. It takes courage to put yourself out there, even with something small." The kindness in her tone was genuine, which somehow made her condescension more painful than Tyler's obvious dismissiveness. Amanda truly believed she was being supportive, encouraging my modest efforts while carefully maintaining the boundaries that kept my ambitions appropriately small. "Thank you," I said, meaning it despite everything else. "That means a lot." "Kevin's such a good husband for encouraging you," she continued. "Some men wouldn't be so understanding about their wives having outside interests. You're lucky to have found someone who wants you to grow." The irony was staggering. Kevin's encouragement consisted entirely of trying to limit my growth to levels that wouldn't threaten his sense of superiority. He supported my business the way someone might support a child's lemonade stand, with indulgent patience and low expectations. As we drove home through the quiet streets of Westlake Hills, Kevin rehashed the evening's conversations with obvious satisfaction. Tyler's promotion had inspired him to think more strategically about his own career trajectory, and he'd already identified several networking opportunities that might accelerate his advancement at Pinnacle. "I'm thinking about scheduling lunch with Marcus Johnson next week," Kevin said as we pulled into our driveway. "He's been with the company for 8 years and has great insights about the promotion process. Plus, his wife's consulting business could be a good model for your next steps." I nodded absently, already thinking about the early morning conference call I had scheduled with our legal team. The final documents for the Pinnacle acquisition would be ready for review by Tuesday, and we'd planned the announcement for Friday morning. Kevin would discover his wife's true identity at the same time as everyone else at his company. The thought should have filled me with anticipation or anxiety, but mostly I felt tired. 4 years of maintaining this elaborate fiction had taken a toll I was only beginning to recognize. The constant performance was exhausting, requiring me to suppress fundamental parts of my personality and hide achievements that represented years of hard work and strategic thinking. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "You seemed a little quiet tonight," Kevin observed as we got ready for bed. "Everything okay with the business?" The question was asked with the kind of gentle concern he might show for a child's disappointed hopes. Kevin genuinely believed that my subdued mood must be related to some minor setback in my craft venture. Because what other concerns could possibly trouble the life of a small-time entrepreneur? "Just thinking about next steps," I said, which was absolutely true, though not in the way he imagined. "Well, don't put too much pressure on yourself," Kevin replied, kissing my forehead with the patronizing affection of a man who believed he was providing comfort. "Rome wasn't built in a day, and successful businesses take time to develop. The important thing is that you're trying." As Kevin fell asleep beside me, I lay awake thinking about the conversation we'd have in less than a week. Friday morning would bring the end of Rachel the struggling craft entrepreneur and the emergence of Rachel Martinez, CEO of Summit Digital Solutions and new owner of Pinnacle Marketing Group. I wondered if Kevin would finally see me clearly, or if he'd simply create a new narrative that allowed him to maintain his sense of superiority. Some people adapt to new information, while others reject anything that threatens their existing worldview. Only time would tell which kind of man I'd actually married. The alarm buzzed at 5:30 in the morning, just as it had every weekday, for the past 4 years. Kevin stirred slightly but didn't wake, his sleep schedule perfectly calibrated to his 8:30 departure for Pinnacle Marketing Group. I slipped out of bed with practiced silence, grabbed the clothes I'd laid out the night before, and headed to our guest bathroom to begin my daily transformation. By 6 o'clock, I was in my car heading downtown to Summit Digital Solutions headquarters, a gleaming 15-story building that Kevin had driven past hundreds of times without ever knowing his wife owned the top 3 floors. The early morning, Austin traffic was light, giving me time to review the overnight messages from our East Coast clients and prepare for what would be one of the most important weeks in my company's history. Lisa Chen was already at her desk when I arrived, surrounded by the controlled chaos that always accompanied major acquisitions. As my chief operating officer and closest friend, Lisa was one of only 3 people who knew about my double life. She'd been begging me to come clean with Kevin for over a year, arguing that the deception was unsustainable and ultimately destructive. "The legal team wants to meet at 8, Lisa said without looking up from her computer screen. "Final review of the acquisition documents before we submit the formal offer to Pinnacle's board." Marcus Johnson's background check came back clean, by the way. He's been pushing for diversity initiatives at Pinnacle for 2 years, but upper management keeps blocking his proposals. Marcus Johnson, the HR director Kevin had mentioned the night before, the same man whose wife's consulting business Kevin thought should serve as a model for my own modest aspirations. If only Kevin knew that I'd already identified Marcus as a key ally in the post-acquisition transition, someone whose progressive ideas would help modernize Pinnacle's outdated corporate culture. "What about Tyler Brooks?" I asked, settling into my office chair and pulling up the comprehensive dossier our research team had compiled on Kevin's friend. "His promotion timing is interesting, considering the company's financial situation." Lisa turned in her chair to face me, her expression serious. "That's where things get complicated. Tyler's promotion isn't based on performance metrics. His client retention rate is actually below company average, and he's lost 2 major accounts in the past 6 months. The promotion appears to be connected to his relationship with Pinnacle's largest shareholder." She handed me a thick folder containing financial records, client communications, and performance evaluations that painted a disturbing picture of nepotism and poor management at Pinnacle Marketing Group. Tyler's success wasn't the result of strategic thinking or exceptional client service, as Kevin believed. It was the product of connections and favoritism that had created a toxic corporate culture where merit took a back seat to politics. This explains why they're struggling to compete with more innovative agencies, I said, scanning through Tyler's client files. They're promoting based on relationships rather than results. No wonder their digital transformation initiatives have failed. The irony wasn't lost on me. Kevin had spent last evening praising Tyler's strategic career advancement, completely unaware that his friend's promotion was actually a symptom of the systemic problems that made Pinnacle an attractive acquisition target. Companies led by incompetent leadership were always easier to purchase and restructure. Our legal team arrived promptly at 8, led by Jennifer Walsh, one of Austin's most respected corporate attorneys. Jennifer had handled 3 previous acquisitions for Summit Digital Solutions, and her track record of successful negotiations had earned her a reputation that commanded respect throughout the Texas business community. The offer is structured to be irresistible, Jennifer explained as we reviewed the final documents. $43 million cash, with retention bonuses for key personnel who meet performance standards during the transition period. Pinnacle's board will struggle to find arguments against a deal that offers their shareholders a 30% premium over current market value. The retention bonuses were a strategic element I'd insisted on including. Employees like Marcus Johnson, who had genuine potential but lacked advancement opportunities under Pinnacle's current leadership, would be rewarded for staying through the transition. Meanwhile, underperformers like Tyler Brooks would find their positions reevaluated based on actual merit rather than political connections. Timeline for board response? I asked, signing the documents that would set everything in motion. They're required to respond within 10 business days, Jennifer replied, but I expect a decision much sooner. Companies in Pinnacle's financial position don't typically keep offers like this waiting. I'd estimate approval by Wednesday, announcement by Friday. The day Kevin expected to start his week celebrating Tyler's promotion and planning his own advancement strategy. Instead, he'd discover that his wife had just become his ultimate boss, owner of the company where he'd spent 4 years building what he considered an impressive career. After the legal team departed, Lisa and I spent the morning reviewing integration, plans, and transition strategies. Summit Digital Solutions had acquired 12 companies in the past 3 years. But none of those deals had carried the personal complications that came with purchasing my husband's employer. We need to discuss Kevin's position, Lisa said during our lunch break, her voice carrying the careful neutrality she used when approaching sensitive topics. His performance reviews are mixed. Good technical skills, adequate client relationships, but limited leadership potential and resistance to collaborative approaches. She was being diplomatic. Kevin's personnel file painted a picture of a competent but unremarkable employee who'd reached his ceiling at Pinnacle years ago. His resistance to collaborative approaches was corporate speak for his tendency to dismiss input from female colleagues and junior staff members. His limited leadership potential reflected his inability to inspire or mentor others. "What would you recommend if he weren't my husband?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Lateral transfer to a role that maximizes his technical strengths, while minimizing his management responsibilities," Lisa replied without hesitation. "He's a solid individual contributor but shouldn't be supervising other people." The assessment was fair and probably generous. Kevin's success at Pinnacle had more to do with the company's low standards than his exceptional abilities. In Summit Digital Solutions' more competitive environment, he'd need to significantly improve his performance to maintain his current status. And Tyler Brooks? Lisa's expression darkened. Immediate termination after the transition period. His client relationships are deteriorating, his team reports are consistently negative, and his ethical standards are questionable. He's exactly the kind of employee who thrives in dysfunctional environments, but becomes a liability in well-managed organizations. The decision to fire Kevin's best friend would undoubtedly create personal complications, but business couldn't be compromised for the sake of social harmony. Tyler's promotion had been a mistake that needed correction, regardless of how it might affect Kevin's social circle or my own domestic tranquility. The rest of the week passed in a carefully orchestrated dance of preparation and performance. During business hours, I managed the final details of the acquisition while simultaneously laying groundwork for the massive restructuring that would follow. Evenings were spent maintaining my facade as Kevin's underachieving wife, listening to his excited plans for leveraging Tyler's promotion to advance his own career. Marcus Johnson invited me to lunch on Thursday, Kevin announced Wednesday evening as we sat in our living room, him reading industry publications while I pretended to work on jewelry designs that were actually organizational charts for Pinnacle's post-acquisition structure. He wants to discuss career development opportunities and maybe introduce me to some senior executives. Marcus Johnson, who would be receiving a substantial promotion and equity stake in the merged company by the following week. The same Marcus, whose wife's small consulting business Kevin thought should inspire my own modest ambitions. If Kevin only knew that Marcus would soon be reporting directly to me as Summit Digital Solutions' new Director of Human Resources. That sounds like a great opportunity, I said, adding details to the chart that would reshape Marcus's entire professional trajectory. You've always said networking is crucial for advancement. Kevin looked up from his magazine with the satisfied expression of a man whose wisdom was being validated by circumstances. Exactly. Tyler's promotion opened doors that weren't visible before. Success creates momentum, and smart people position themselves to benefit from other people's achievements. The irony was staggering. Kevin believed he was positioning himself to benefit from Tyler's success, completely unaware that Tyler's tenure at Pinnacle would end within 60 days of the acquisition. Meanwhile, Kevin's own future depended entirely on his ability to adapt to working for the wife he'd been condescending to for 4 years. Thursday morning brought confirmation that Jennifer Walsh's timeline had been optimistic. Pinnacle's board had scheduled an emergency meeting for Thursday afternoon to vote on Summit Digital Solutions' acquisition offer. The company's financial situation was apparently worse than our initial analysis had suggested, making our offer even more attractive to shareholders desperate for liquidity. They're going to accept, Lisa informed me during our morning strategy session. Our inside source at Pinnacle says the board chairman called it a lifeline. They'll announce the decision tomorrow morning, followed by a company-wide meeting at 10 o'clock to address employee concerns. Friday morning. Less than 24 hours away from the moment when my carefully constructed double life would finally collapse. I felt a strange mixture of anticipation and anxiety, like an actor preparing for opening night after years of private rehearsals. Employee retention strategy? I asked, though we'd already reviewed these plans dozens of times. Generous severance packages for non-essential personnel, retention bonuses for key talent, and comprehensive retraining programs for employees who show potential but need skill development, Lisa recited. Marcus Johnson will lead the HR transition, reporting directly to you. We've identified 15 employees for immediate termination, 37 for retention with current roles, and 23 for lateral transfers or position modifications. Kevin wasn't among the 15 marked for immediate termination, though he also wasn't on the retention list. His future would depend on his ability to accept the new reality and demonstrate genuine growth in his approach to collaboration and leadership. Tyler Brooks, however, was definitely among those scheduled for immediate termination. His inflated position, questionable ethics, and negative impact on team morale made him exactly the kind of employee who needed to be removed quickly to prevent cultural contamination of Summit Digital Solutions' more progressive environment. Thursday evening at home, Kevin was practically vibrating with excitement about his lunch meeting with Marcus Johnson. The conversation had apparently gone better than expected, with Marcus expressing interest in Kevin's career development and suggesting several advancement opportunities that might be available in the coming months. He mentioned that Pinnacle might be making some significant changes soon, Kevin said, as we prepared dinner together, his enthusiasm making him more talkative than usual. Didn't provide details, but he implied that employees who've demonstrated loyalty and competence could benefit from new opportunities. Marcus was clearly preparing Kevin for the transition without revealing confidential information about the pending acquisition. As someone who would be playing a key role in the post-merger integration, Marcus understood the importance of maintaining employee morale while navigating the sensitive period before public announcements. He also said the most interesting thing about his wife's business. Kevin continued, completely missing the irony of his next statement. Apparently, she started small but had some kind of breakthrough that transformed everything. Now she's consulting for major corporations and making more money than most executives at Pinnacle. I nearly dropped the knife I was using to chop vegetables. Marcus's wife, whose modest consulting business Kevin had held up as an appropriate model for my own limited ambitions, was apparently far more successful than Kevin had realized. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Kevin consistently underestimated the capabilities and achievements of the women around him, including his own wife. "That's wonderful," I managed, keeping my voice steady. "It must be rewarding to see her success grow." "The key was professional development," Kevin said, warming to his favorite theme. "She took business classes, networked with industry professionals, and approached her growth strategically rather than just hoping for the best. It's exactly what I've been suggesting for your jewelry business." The suggestion that I needed professional development was particularly absurd, considering that I'd been invited to deliver the keynote address at next month's Southwest Digital Marketing Conference. But Kevin's reality required me to be the struggling entrepreneur who could benefit from his guidance, not the established industry expert who'd built a company worth $43 million. Thursday night, I lay awake reviewing every detail of Friday's planned revelation. The acquisition announcement would go out at 9 o'clock, followed by the company-wide meeting at 10. Kevin typically arrived at Pinnacle around 8:30, giving him just enough time to settle in before the news broke. I'd considered calling him beforehand, revealing my identity privately before he discovered it in front of his colleagues. But 4 years of maintaining this elaborate deception had taught me that half measures only created more complications. Kevin needed to understand the full scope of what had been hidden from him, and that understanding required experiencing the complete shock of public revelation. Lisa had offered to handle the announcement herself, sparing me the complexity of navigating Kevin's reaction in a professional setting. But I'd insisted on taking the lead. This was my company, my acquisition, and my marriage. Whatever consequences followed from Friday's revelation, I needed to face them directly rather than hiding behind intermediaries. Friday morning arrived with the crisp clarity of a Texas autumn day. I left the house at 7, 2 hours before. Kevin's alarm would wake him for what he assumed would be another routine day at Pinnacle Marketing Group. By the time he was drinking his morning coffee and reviewing his calendar, I'd be standing in Summit Digital Solutions boardroom, preparing to announce the acquisition that would fundamentally alter both our professional and personal lives. The drive downtown felt surreal, like traveling toward a destination I'd been planning to reach for years while simultaneously dreading the journey itself. 4 years of careful deception were about to end in a single morning, replaced by whatever truth could be built from the rubble of our shattered assumptions about each other. Lisa was waiting in my office with final confirmation from Pinnacle's board and a detailed timeline for the day's events. The acquisition had been approved unanimously, with the announcement scheduled for distribution at exactly 9 o'clock Central Time. Kevin would receive the same email as every other Pinnacle employee, learning simultaneously that his company had been sold and that his wife was the purchaser. "Second thoughts?" Lisa asked, her voice carrying 4 years of accumulated concern about the sustainability of my double life. "None," I replied, though the certainty in my voice surprised. "Mom, it's time for the truth, whatever consequences that brings." The next few hours would determine whether my marriage could survive the revelation that I'd been living a lie for 4 years, or whether Kevin's ego was too fragile to accept a reality where his wife had achieved greater success than he'd ever imagined possible. Either way, The exhausting performance would finally be over, replaced by whatever authentic relationship could emerge from the ashes of our carefully constructed deceptions. At 8:59, I stood in Pinnacle Marketing Group's main conference room, watching through the glass walls as employees settled into their desks for what they assumed would be another ordinary Friday. Kevin's cubicle was visible from my vantage point, his focused attention on his computer screen as he reviewed morning emails, completely unaware that his world was about to shift on its axis. Marcus Johnson stood beside me, his nervous energy barely contained as he checked his phone for the third time in 2 minutes. As Pinnacle's HR director, he'd been briefed on the acquisition and my identity the previous evening, sworn to secrecy, until the official announcement. His shock had been palpable when Jennifer Walsh introduced me as both the acquiring CEO and Kevin Martinez's wife. 30 seconds, Marcus murmured, his voice tight with anticipation. Through the conference room's floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the entire Pinnacle office spread out like a stage set. Tyler Brooks was holding court near the coffee station, presumably regaling his colleagues with more stories about his recent promotion. Amanda's husband looked every bit the part of a rising executive, his expensive suit and confident posture commanding attention from the small group gathered around him. Kevin remained at his desk, methodically working through his morning routine with the precision that had initially attracted me to him years ago. There was something endearing about his focused concentration, the way he approached even mundane tasks with careful attention to detail. That quality had served him well in his technical roles, even if it hadn't translated into the leadership success he craved. My phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. Email sent. Company-wide distribution. Complete. Across the office, I watched as employees began checking their messages. The reaction was almost choreographed in its progression. First came the confused double takes as people read subject lines about company acquisitions. Then the hurried opening of emails and rapid scanning of content. Finally, the shocked expressions and urgent whispered conversations as the reality sank in. Kevin's reaction was particularly fascinating to observe. He opened the email with casual interest, probably expecting routine corporate communication, about policy updates or team meetings. I watched his face change as he read, confusion giving way to disbelief as he scrolled through the announcement that Summit Digital Solutions had acquired Pinnacle Marketing Group for $43 million. His eyes found the name of the acquiring company's CEO listed at the bottom of the message, Rachel Martinez. For a moment, he simply stared at the screen, his brain clearly struggling to process the possibility that his underachieving wife shared a name with the successful entrepreneur who'd just purchased his employer. Tyler's reaction was even more dramatic. His confident posture deflated as he read the news on his phone, the expensive coffee cup slipping from his suddenly slack fingers to shatter against the polished concrete floor. His promotion celebration was turning into a wake for his carefully constructed career advancement fantasy. "They're ready for you," Marcus said, gesturing toward the podium that had been set up at the front of the conference room. I took a deep breath and stepped forward, my heels clicking against the hardwood floor with a sound that seemed to echo through the sudden silence. Conversations died as employees noticed movement in the conference room, their attention drawn to the unfamiliar woman who'd appeared in their executive meeting space. Kevin's head turned toward the commotion, his gaze landing on me through the glass walls. Recognition dawned slowly, his expression cycling through confusion, disbelief, and something approaching panic as he processed the impossible scenario unfolding before him. "Good morning, everyone," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the office's open layout thanks to the wireless microphone Marcus had provided. "My name is Rachel Martinez, Chief Executive Officer of Summit Digital Solutions, and I'm here to discuss the acquisition announcement you've just received." The silence that followed was profound. 67 employees stood or sat in various states of shock, their morning routine shattered by the revelation that a stranger had purchased their company. But for Kevin, the shock went deeper than professional uncertainty. His wife, the woman he'd been advising on basic business principles just hours earlier, was standing in his office announcing herself as his new ultimate supervisor. I could see him in my peripheral vision, frozen at his desk like a statue. His hands remained poised over his keyboard, but his attention was completely focused on the impossible scene playing out before him. "I understand this news comes as a surprise," I continued, maintaining the professional tone I'd perfected over 7 years of building Summit Digital Solutions. "Acquisitions always create uncertainty, and I want to address your concerns directly and honestly." Tyler had managed to compose himself enough to move closer to the conference room, his expensive shoes crunching over the fragments of his shattered coffee cup. His face bore the expression of someone watching a car accident in slow motion, unable to look away from the disaster unfolding before him. "Summit Digital Solutions has been monitoring Pinnacle's performance for 18 months, I explained, pulling up the presentation slides that would outline the transition plan. "We've identified significant opportunities for growth and modernization that will benefit both companies and, more importantly, provide enhanced career opportunities for talented employees." The word talented carried deliberate emphasis. In business acquisitions, employees quickly learned to read between the lines of corporate communications. Those described as talented could expect to thrive under new management. Those conspicuously absent from such descriptions should probably update their resumes. Kevin finally found the strength to stand, his chair rolling backward as he rose, on unsteady legs. He moved toward the conference room like a sleepwalker, his gaze never leaving my face as he tried to reconcile the woman he'd married with the executive delivering a corporate presentation to his colleagues. "The integration process will begin immediately," I continued, clicking to the next slide that outlined the timeline for organizational changes. "Department heads will receive detailed briefings about their team's futures, and individual meetings will be scheduled to discuss career development opportunities within the expanded organization." Marcus stepped forward to address specific HR concerns, fielding questions about benefits, retirement accounts, and severance packages with the competence that had made him an ideal partner for this transition. His answers were thorough and reassuring, designed to calm fears while maintaining honest communication about the challenges ahead. But my attention remained focused on Kevin, who had reached the conference room doorway and stood staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. It wasn't anger or betrayal, though those emotions would certainly come later. It was the look of someone whose fundamental understanding of reality had just been proven completely wrong. "Mrs. Martinez," called out Sarah Chen, one of Pinnacle's account coordinators. "Can you tell us about Summit Digital Solutions company culture? What changes should we expect in our day-to-day work environment?" The question provided an opportunity to address one of Pinnacle's most problematic areas. Our research had revealed systemic issues with gender discrimination, limited advancement opportunities for women, and a boys' club atmosphere that had stifled innovation and alienated talented employees. Summit Digital Solutions is committed to creating an inclusive environment where advancement is based on merit rather than personal relationships, I replied, my gaze briefly meeting Kevin's before returning to the broader audience. "We've found that diverse teams produce better results for clients and create more satisfying work experiences for everyone involved." Tyler's face darkened at this indirect reference to his own promotion, which had been based more on networking than performance. Several female employees exchanged meaningful glances, clearly recognizing the implications of my statement for their own career prospects. "What about current management structures?" asked David Park, a senior graphic designer whose talent had been consistently overlooked by Pinnacle's leadership. "Will there be changes in reporting relationships and departmental organization?" This question struck at the heart of the coming transformation. Pinnacle's management structure was a relic of outdated business practices, with too many layers of supervision and too few opportunities for creative input from junior staff. Summit Digital Solutions operated with a flatter hierarchy that empowered employees to contribute meaningfully to client solutions. Significant restructuring will be necessary, I confirmed, pulling up an organizational chart that showed the new reporting relationships. We're eliminating redundant management positions while creating new roles focused on innovation and client service. Some current managers will transition to individual contributor roles where their technical skills can be better utilized. The message was clear without being explicitly stated. Managers who'd advance through politics rather than competence would find their elevated positions reevaluated. Employees with genuine talent but limited advancement opportunities would see new pathways for growth. Kevin's expression grew more strained as he processed the implications of my presentation. His own management aspirations, the promotion he'd been hoping Tyler's success would help him achieve, were evaporating before his eyes. More troubling still was the dawning recognition that his wife's success far exceeded anything he'd imagined possible. "Timeline for these changes?" Marcus asked, providing a cue for me to address the practical concerns that were undoubtedly overwhelming the audience. "Initial restructuring will be completed within 60 days, I replied. "Individual? Meetings will begin Monday to discuss specific role changes and career development opportunities. Severance packages for affected employees will be generous and include comprehensive job placement assistance." The mention of severance packages sent a visible ripple of anxiety through the room. Employees who'd felt secure in their positions just an hour earlier were now calculating their chances of surviving the corporate restructuring. The uncertainty was uncomfortable but necessary, a catalyst for the cultural changes that would modernize Pinnacle's operations. "Questions about specific departments or individual roles should be directed to Mr. Johnson," I continued, gesturing toward Marcus, who nodded professionally. "He'll be coordinating the transition process and ensuring that everyone receives clear communication about their future with the organization." Tyler finally found his voice, though it came out strained and defensive. "What about recent promotions and performance recognition? Will those decisions be honored under the new management structure?" The question was obviously self-serving, but it addressed concerns that extended beyond Tyler's personal situation. Other employees who'd recently received promotions or positive performance reviews wanted assurance that their achievements would be recognized by the new ownership. "All recent personnel decisions will be reviewed based on documented performance metrics and objective criteria," I replied diplomatically. "Promotions supported by clear evidence of exceptional performance will be maintained. Those based on other factors may be subject to reevaluation." Tyler's face flushed red as the implications sank in. His promotion had been announced just days earlier, but it was exactly the kind of decision that would be reversed under merit-based evaluation. His client retention numbers, team leadership scores, and overall performance metrics wouldn't survive objective scrutiny. Kevin moved closer to the front of the conference room, his shock beginning to transform into something more complex. I could see him struggling to reconcile years of assumptions about my capabilities with the evidence of my actual achievements. The cognitive dissonance was almost physically painful to witness. "Are there opportunities for current employees to advance within Summit Digital Solutions?" asked Jennifer Walsh, a junior account manager whose potential had been consistently ignored by Pinnacle's male-dominated leadership structure. This question allowed me to highlight one of the key benefits of the acquisition for talented employees who'd been held back by Pinnacle's dysfunctional culture. Summit Digital Solutions had built its reputation on identifying and developing talent regardless of traditional hierarchies or demographic characteristics. "Absolutely," I replied with genuine enthusiasm. Summit Digital Solutions has 3 times as many management positions as Pinnacle, with offices in Austin, Dallas, and Houston. High-performing employees will have access to advancement opportunities that simply didn't exist within Pinnacle's smaller structure. The promise of expanded career opportunities visibly energized several employees who'd been frustrated by Pinnacle's limited growth potential. For people like Jennifer Walsh and David Park, the acquisition represented a chance to finally receive recognition for their contributions, and advance beyond the artificial barriers that had constrained their careers. "What about company culture and work-life balance?" asked Michael Torres, account coordinator who'd been quietly planning his departure from Pinnacle due to the toxic management environment. Summit Digital Solutions was named one of Austin's best places to work for 3 consecutive years, I replied, noting the surprised expressions this information generated. "We offer comprehensive benefits, flexible scheduling, professional development support, and a collaborative environment that values diverse perspectives and innovative thinking." The contrast with Pinnacle's culture couldn't have been starker. Where Pinnacle operated through hierarchy and politics, Summit Digital Solutions emphasized collaboration and merit. Where Pinnacle limited advancement opportunities, Summit offered clear pathways for growth. Where Pinnacle tolerated discrimination and favoritism, Summit demanded equity and inclusion. Kevin's expression continued to evolve as he absorbed the scope of what I'd built while he thought I was struggling with basic business concepts. The company I'd created wasn't just successful, it was the kind of organization he'd always claimed to want to work for. His complaints about Pinnacle's dysfunctional culture and limited opportunities had been unknowingly describing the very problems I'd solved at Summit Digital Solutions. "Individual transition meetings will begin Monday morning," Marcus announced, taking control of the logistics while I concluded the presentation. "Every employee will receive a detailed briefing about their specific situation and future opportunities. We understand this is a significant change, and we're committed to making the process as smooth as possible." As employees began to disperse, returning to their desks with a mixture of excitement and anxiety, Kevin remained frozen near the front of the conference room. His colleagues moved around him like water flowing around a stone, engaged in urgent conversations about the morning's revelations while he stood silent and still. Tyler approached the conference room with obvious reluctance, his earlier confidence replaced by the recognition that his carefully constructed career advancement was crumbling. The promotion he'd been celebrating just days earlier was almost certainly going to be reversed, along with the salary increase and corner office that had come with it. "Rachel," he said, his voice carefully modulated to hide his growing panic. "I had no idea Kevin's wife was involved in corporate acquisitions. This is quite a surprise." The familiarity in his tone was presumptuous, an attempt to leverage his social connection with Kevin to create a personal relationship that might protect his professional position. But Tyler's performance record spoke for itself, and no amount of networking could compensate for his documented failures in client management and team leadership. "Mr. Brooks," I replied with professional distance, making it clear that our social acquaintance wouldn't influence business decisions. "Your transition meeting is scheduled for Monday at 9 o'clock. Mr. Johnson will provide details about your options moving forward." The formal tone and early meeting time conveyed the message that Tyler's future with the organization was uncertain at best. Monday morning meetings were typically reserved for employees whose positions were being eliminated, while those with secure futures were scheduled later in the week to allow for more detailed career planning discussions. Tyler's confident facade finally cracked, his desperation becoming visible as he realized that his promotion wasn't going to protect him from the consequences of his poor performance. "I'm sure we can work something out," he said, his voice taking on a pleading quality. "Kevin and I have been friends for years. We understand each other's value." The suggestion that Kevin's friendship might influence my business decisions was both inappropriate and revealing. Tyler assumed that personal relationships would carry the same weight at Summit Digital Solutions that they had at Pinnacle, not understanding that merit-based evaluation was a core principle of the company. I'd built, "Professional decisions will be based on documented performance and organizational needs," I replied firmly. "Personal relationships don't factor into business evaluations." Tyler's face went pale as he absorbed the finality of my statement. His networking strategy, which had served him well at Pinnacle, was not only irrelevant, but potentially harmful in an environment that prioritized competence over connections. As Tyler retreated, Kevin finally approached the front of the conference room. His initial shock had evolved into something more complex, a mixture of awe, confusion, and what might have been the beginning of genuine respect. The woman he'd been condescending to for 4 years had just demonstrated capabilities that exceeded his own by orders of magnitude. "Rachel," he said quietly, his voice carrying a vulnerability I hadn't heard since our early dating days. "We need to talk." The private office that Marcus had arranged for our conversation felt impossibly small, despite its generous dimensions. Kevin sat across from me, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, his usual confidence replaced by something I'd never seen before, genuine humility mixed with bewilderment. The familiar patterns of our marriage had been shattered in a single morning, leaving both of us navigating uncharted emotional territory. "4 years," Kevin said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "4 years you've been building all of this while I thought you were struggling to sell $20 bracelets on Etsy." The pain in his voice was unexpected. I'd anticipated anger, defensiveness, perhaps even accusations of manipulation and betrayal. But Kevin's primary emotion seemed to be grief for the relationship he'd thought we shared, mourning for a dynamic that had never been real. "The jewelry business was never entirely fictional," I said carefully, choosing my words with the precision I'd learned from years of corporate negotiations. "I do create pieces occasionally, mostly as stress relief. But Summit Digital Solutions has been my primary focus since 6 months before we met." Kevin's eyes widened at this timeline revelation. "Before we met? You mean when we started dating? When I was giving you advice about business fundamentals and market research, you were already running a multi-million-dollar company?" The absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on either of us. Kevin had spent our early relationship mansplaining entrepreneurship to someone who was already more successful than he'd ever be. His well-intentioned guidance had been not just unnecessary, but laughably inappropriate, like a high school student offering calculus tutoring to a university mathematics professor. "I tried to tell you," I said, though we both knew that wasn't entirely accurate. "On our 3rd date, I started to explain what I actually did for work. You interrupted to share your thoughts about women who prioritize careers over relationships, about how driven women often struggle to maintain healthy marriages." The memory hung between us like a physical presence. Kevin had been pontificating about work-life balance, completely unaware that he was describing the exact fears that had kept me from revealing my true identity. His casual dismissal of ambitious women had convinced me that honesty would doom our relationship before it had a chance to develop. "So you decided to lie instead," Kevin said, though his tone carried more confusion than accusation. "I decided to protect something that felt precious," I corrected. "You fell in love with the idea of being needed, Kevin. You enjoyed feeling like the successful partner who could guide and support his struggling wife. If I'd revealed my actual situation, would you have stayed interested in a woman who didn't need your advice or financial support?" The question forced Kevin to confront uncomfortable truths about his own motivations and insecurities. His attraction to me had been partly based on the power dynamic he'd assumed existed between us, the satisfying role of mentor and provider that fed his ego and sense of masculine identity. "I don't know," he admitted, his honesty surprising both of us. "Maybe not initially. But Rachel, you never gave me the chance to prove that I could handle the truth. You made that decision for both of us." His point was valid and painful. My deception had been partially protective, but also controlling, denying Kevin the opportunity to demonstrate growth or challenge his own assumptions. I'd created a self-fulfilling prophecy, assuming he couldn't handle my success and then ensuring he never had to try. "You're right," I acknowledged. "I made choices based on fear rather than trust. But Kevin, those fears weren't completely unfounded. Do you remember what you said about Susan Williams when she was promoted to regional manager at your old company?" Kevin's face flushed as the memory surfaced. Susan Williams had been a talented colleague whose advancement had threatened Kevin's sense of workplace hierarchy. His reaction had been to question her qualifications and suggest that her promotion was the result of diversity initiatives rather than merit. "I was jealous and immature," Kevin said quietly. "Susan deserved that promotion more than anyone else in the department. My comments were defensive and sexist." The admission represented more self-awareness than Kevin had demonstrated during our entire marriage. Something about the morning's revelations had cracked open his carefully maintained self-image, forcing him to examine patterns of behavior he'd previously justified or ignored. "Those comments convinced me that you weren't ready to accept a wife who might be more successful than you," I continued. "Every time you dismissed female executives or made jokes about working mothers, you reinforced my decision to keep my career hidden." We sat in silence for several minutes, each processing the complex web of choices and assumptions that had defined our relationship. The foundation of our marriage had been built on mutual performance, my pretense of domestic struggle, and Kevin's performance of superior wisdom and guidance. "The house," Kevin said suddenly, his voice sharp with new understanding. "You bought our house before we got married. I always wondered how we qualified for such a large mortgage on my salary alone." The house had been one of the more complicated aspects of maintaining my deception. I'd purchased the property outright with Summit Digital Solutions profits, then created an elaborate fiction about seller financing and family assistance to explain our mortgage-free status. Kevin had accepted the explanation without detailed investigation, trusting his wife's account of financial arrangements that seemed too good to be true. "Cash purchase," I confirmed. "The mortgage documents you signed were just paperwork to maintain the fiction. We've never actually owed money on the house." Kevin buried his face in his hands, overwhelmed by the scope of deception that had surrounded him for years. Every aspect of our shared life had been carefully constructed to support the lie about my professional identity, our financial security, our social positioning. Even our vacation destinations had been determined by Summit Digital Solutions' success rather than Kevin's modest income. "The business trips," he continued, connecting more pieces of the puzzle. "When you said you were going to craft fairs in Dallas or Houston, you were actually traveling for Summit Digital Solutions. Client meetings, investor presentations, industry conferences," I confirmed. "Lisa Chen has been covering for me for 4 years, providing alibis and managing my schedule to maintain the separation between my two lives." The mention of Lisa seemed to trigger another realization for Kevin. "Lisa Chen, you said she was your craft business mentor, someone who'd helped you set up your Etsy shop. She's actually your business partner." "Chief Operating Officer," I corrected, "and one of the smartest people I've ever worked with. She's been begging me to tell you the truth for over a year, arguing that the deception was unsustainable and ultimately harmful to our marriage." Kevin's expression shifted as he processed this information. "So other people knew? Your employees, your business associates, they all knew you were married to someone who had no idea who you really were?" The shame in his voice was unmistakable. Kevin was realizing that he'd been an unknowing participant in what must have seemed like an elaborate joke to anyone aware of the situation. The successful CEO's husband, who condescended to her about basic business principles while remaining completely oblivious to her actual achievements. "Very few people knew about our marriage," I assured him. "I kept my personal and professional lives completely separate. Most of my employees and clients know me only as Rachel Chen, using my maiden name professionally. The separation was so complete that even people who knew both of us socially didn't make the connection." This explanation seemed to provide some comfort to Kevin, reducing the embarrassment of his public ignorance. But it also highlighted another troubling aspect of our relationship. I'd been living a double life so thoroughly that my husband and my professional identity existed in completely separate worlds. "Why now?" Kevin asked, his voice steadying as he moved from shock toward practical concerns. "Why reveal everything today instead of continuing the separation indefinitely?" The question went to the heart of my decision to acquire Pinnacle Marketing Group, despite the personal complications it would create. I could have targeted any number of companies for acquisition without involving Kevin's workplace, maintaining our domestic fiction while continuing to build Summit Digital Solutions' portfolio. Because the separation was destroying both of us, I replied honestly. You were becoming increasingly frustrated with what you saw as my lack of ambition and success. I was exhausted from constantly performing incompetence and hiding my actual achievements. Our marriage was dying slowly under the weight of all the lies. Kevin nodded slowly, recognizing the truth in my assessment. Our recent conversations had become increasingly strained, with his disappointment in my supposed failures creating tension that affected every aspect of our relationship. His suggestions about business classes and career counseling had become more frequent and urgent, reflecting his growing concern about my professional stagnation. And acquiring Pinnacle was the catalyst for change, Kevin said, understanding the strategic thinking behind my decision. Acquiring Pinnacle was a sound business decision that happened to create an unavoidable personal revelation, I clarified. The company has been struggling with outdated management practices and declining client satisfaction. Summit Digital Solutions can modernize their operations and improve outcomes for both employees and customers. Even in this intensely personal conversation, I couldn't help but return to the business rationale that had driven the acquisition. Pinnacle Marketing Group represented exactly the kind of opportunity that Summit Digital Solutions specialized in, a fundamentally sound company, hobbled by poor leadership and outdated practices. What about Tyler? Kevin asked, his voice carrying reluctant concern for his friend, despite everything that had been revealed about Tyler's actual performance. The question about Tyler Brooks was inevitable, but complicated. Kevin's friendship with Tyler had been built partly on shared frustration with workplace limitations and mutual support for each other's career aspirations. Learning that Tyler's recent success was undeserved would force Kevin to reevaluate not just his friend's character, but his own judgment about professional merit. Tyler's employment will be terminated during the transition period, I said gently, but firmly. His performance metrics don't support his current position, and his management style is incompatible with Summit Digital Solutions' collaborative culture. Kevin's face went pale as he absorbed the implications for his closest friend. Because of his relationship with me? Is this some kind of punishment for how he's treated you socially? The suggestion that I would use business decisions to settle personal scores was both hurtful and revealing about Kevin's assumptions regarding my character and professionalism. He still didn't fully understand the woman he'd married, imagining vindictiveness where there was only objective evaluation. Tyler's termination is based entirely on documented performance issues, I explained, pulling up the personnel file on my tablet and sliding it across the desk. Client retention rates below company average, team satisfaction scores in the bottom quartile, and ethical violations that were ignored by previous management. Personal relationships don't influence personnel decisions at Summit Digital Solutions. Kevin reviewed Tyler's file with growing dismay, his expression shifting from defensive concern to reluctant acceptance as the evidence mounted. His friend's recent promotion hadn't been the reward for exceptional performance that Kevin had assumed, but rather a symptom of Pinnacle's dysfunctional promotion practices. He's going to blame me, Kevin said quietly. Tyler will assume that I knew about your identity and helped orchestrate his firing. The social complications of the acquisition were unavoidable, but necessary. Kevin's friendship with Tyler had been based partly on shared assumptions about success and merit that Tyler's actual performance didn't support. The relationship would either evolve to accommodate new realities or dissolve under the pressure of conflicting truths. What Tyler assumes is beyond our control, I replied. Your job is to decide whether you can accept the truth about his performance and your own situation, or whether you prefer the comfortable illusions that have defined your recent friendship. The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock on the office door. Marcus Johnson entered with the apologetic expression of someone bearing necessary but unwelcome information. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Marcus said, "but we have a situation developing in the main office. Several employees are demanding immediate clarification about their job security, and Tyler Brooks is encouraging what might become an organized resistance to the acquisition." The news wasn't entirely surprising. Corporate acquisitions always created anxiety and uncertainty, emotions that could be exploited by employees who had reasons to fear the coming changes. Tyler's attempt to organize resistance was predictable, given his precarious position, though it would ultimately accelerate rather than prevent his termination. "What kind of resistance?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "Claims that the acquisition is illegitimate, suggestions that employees should contact the previous ownership about reversing the deal, and accusations that the new management has personal vendettas against specific individuals," Marcus reported. Tyler is implying that his termination is related to personal relationships rather than professional performance. Kevin's expression grew more strained as he realized that his friend was not only facing justified termination, but was also actively sabotaging the transition process. Tyler's response to professional failure was to create chaos and confusion rather than accepting responsibility for his poor performance. "Handle it according to standard protocols," I instructed Marcus. "Anyone attempting to undermine the transition process should be escorted from the building immediately. This is a business acquisition, not a democracy. Employees can accept the new reality or find other employment." Marcus nodded and withdrew, leaving Kevin and me to confront the immediate consequences of our personal revelation. Tyler's behavior was forcing Kevin to choose between loyalty to a friend who was acting destructively and acceptance of his wife's legitimate business authority. "You have to fire him today," Kevin said quietly, surprising me with his decisive tone. "Tyler's behavior is hurting innocent employees who are already anxious about their futures. Whatever our personal situation, he doesn't have the right to create chaos for everyone else." The maturity of Kevin's response was unexpected and encouraging. Instead of defending his friend's inappropriate behavior, Kevin was prioritizing the welfare of other employees and the integrity of the transition process. His ability to separate personal loyalty from professional judgment suggested possibilities for growth that I hadn't anticipated. "Are you prepared for how this will affect your social relationships?" I asked. "Tyler will certainly blame you for his termination, and other mutual friends may take sides based on incomplete information." Kevin considered the question seriously before responding. "I've been thinking about something Marcus said during our lunch yesterday. He mentioned that the most important thing in any workplace is trust, and that trust has to be based on honest communication and shared values. If my friendships can't survive honest evaluation of professional competence, maybe they weren't worth maintaining." The insight represented a level of growth that Kevin hadn't demonstrated during our marriage. His willingness to prioritize principles over social comfort suggested that the morning's revelations had catalyzed genuine self-examination rather than just defensive anger. Our conversation was interrupted again, this time by Lisa Chen's arrival, with urgent updates about the developing situation in the main office. Her expression was grim as she reported on Tyler's escalating attempts to undermine the acquisition. He's contacted 3 former Pinnacle executives and 2 major clients, claiming that the acquisition is fraudulent and encouraging them to pressure for reversal, Lisa reported. He's also sent emails to his entire contact list making personal accusations about your motivations and suggesting that employees organize formal complaints. Tyler's behavior had crossed from inappropriate to potentially actionable, creating legal exposure for himself while damaging Pinnacle's client relationships. His response to professional failure was to lash out destructively, confirming that his termination was not just warranted, but urgent. Security escort, immediate termination, and legal review of his communications, I decided. Anyone who chooses to follow his lead should be offered the same treatment. We're not going to allow sabotage to masquerade as employee advocacy. As Lisa departed to implement these decisions, Kevin and I faced the reality that our personal reconciliation would have to proceed against the backdrop of professional chaos created by his closest friend. Tyler's behavior was forcing us to unite in response to external threats, rather than allowing us to work through our personal issues at a more natural pace. "I need to make a public statement," Kevin said, his voice carrying newfound resolve. "The other employees need to hear from me that I support the acquisition and that Tyler doesn't speak for anyone but himself." The offer was both unexpected and deeply meaningful. Kevin was volunteering to publicly choose his wife's professional authority over his friend's destructive behavior, a decision that would have significant personal and social consequences. "Are you certain about that?" I asked. "Once you make a public statement, there's no way to minimize the personal cost of opposing Tyler." Kevin's response came without hesitation. "I'm certain. Tyler's behavior is wrong, and it's hurting people who don't deserve to suffer because he can't accept the consequences of his own poor performance. Whatever problems you and I need to work through, they don't include tolerating sabotage from someone I used to call a friend." The strength of Kevin's moral clarity was revelatory, suggesting depths of character that our marriage's false dynamics had never allowed him to demonstrate. Perhaps the man I'd married had more capacity for growth and principled decision-making than either of us had realized. The main conference room buzzed with nervous energy as employees gathered for Kevin's impromptu address. Word had spread quickly about Tyler's removal from the building, creating a mixture of shock, relief, and uncertainty among the staff. Some employees whispered anxiously about job security, while others seemed energized by the prospect of working in an environment free from Tyler's toxic influence. Kevin stood at the front of the room, his posture straighter than I'd seen in years. The man who had entered this building that morning expecting another routine day at Pinnacle Marketing Group was gone, replaced by someone who understood that his entire worldview had been fundamentally challenged and found wanting. "Many of you are confused about what happened this morning," Kevin began, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to reveal. "I want to address the rumors and speculation directly, because you deserve honest information from someone you know and trust." He paused, his gaze finding mine across the room. In that moment, I saw something I'd never witnessed before. Kevin choosing difficult truth over comfortable deception, prioritizing integrity over social harmony. Rachel Martinez, the CEO of Summit Digital Solutions who announced our acquisition this morning, is my wife, Kevin continued, his words sending a visible ripple of shock through the assembled group. "For 4 years, I believed she was struggling to build a small craft business from our home. This morning, I learned that she's actually built one of Austin's most successful digital marketing companies." The silence that followed was profound. Employees stared at Kevin with expressions ranging from disbelief to sympathy, processing the personal implications of a revelation that transcended typical corporate drama. Jennifer Walsh, the junior account manager whose potential had been consistently overlooked by Pinnacle's previous leadership, raised her hand tentatively. "Kevin, are you saying you didn't know about your wife's company when Summit made the acquisition offer?" "I had no idea," Kevin replied with painful honesty. "I spent 4 years giving business advice to someone who was already more successful than I'll probably ever be. I condescended to her about basic entrepreneurship while she was building a company worth $43 million. The admission was remarkable for its complete absence of self-pity or deflection. Kevin was acknowledging his ignorance without attempting to minimize its scope or blame external factors for his failure to recognize his wife's achievements. David Park, the talented graphic designer whose contributions had been consistently undervalued, spoke up from the back of the room. "What about Tyler's claims that the acquisition is some kind of personal vendetta?" Kevin's expression hardened slightly at the mention of his former friend. "Tyler Brooks was terminated because his performance metrics don't support his position, not because of any personal relationship. I've seen his personnel file, and the decision was entirely justified based on objective criteria. The firmness of Kevin's response surprised many employees who knew about his friendship with Tyler. His willingness to publicly contradict someone he'd been close to demonstrated a commitment to truth that impressed even skeptical colleagues. Marcus Johnson stepped forward to provide additional context. I want everyone to understand that the acquisition process included comprehensive evaluation of all personnel records. Decisions about retention, promotion, or termination are based solely on documented performance and organizational needs. Sarah Chen, the account coordinator who'd asked about company culture during my earlier presentation, looked directly at Kevin as she posed her next question. How do we know that other personnel decisions won't be influenced by personal relationships or conflicts? The question struck at the heart of employee concerns about favoritism and nepotism under the new ownership structure. Everyone understood that having the CEO's husband as a colleague created potential complications that needed to be addressed transparently. Because I'm not going to receive any special treatment, Kevin replied without hesitation. My position will be evaluated using the same criteria applied to everyone else. If my performance doesn't meet Summit Digital Solutions standards, I'll face the same consequences as any other employee. This commitment to equal treatment was both admirable and risky for Kevin personally. By publicly rejecting any claims to special consideration, he was ensuring that his future with the company would depend entirely on his ability to adapt and improve. Lisa Chen entered the conference room carrying a tablet with updates on the transition process. Her expression was professional but satisfied as she reported on the morning's developments. Tyler Brooks has been escorted from the building, and his access to all company systems has been revoked, Lisa announced. 3 employees who chose to join his protest have also been terminated. The disruption to normal operations has been minimal, and we're proceeding with the planned integration timeline. The news that Tyler's rebellion had attracted only 3 supporters spoke volumes about his actual standing among Pinnacle employees. Despite his recent promotion and confident public persona, Tyler had failed to build the kind of genuine relationships that might have motivated colleagues to risk their own positions defending him. Michael Torres, the account coordinator who'd been planning to leave Pinnacle due to its toxic culture, raised his hand to ask about specific policy changes. Can you tell us more about Summit Digital Solutions' approach to professional development and advancement opportunities? This question allowed Kevin to demonstrate knowledge he'd gained from reviewing company materials Lisa had provided during their private conversation. His ability to speak knowledgeably about Summit's policies showed his genuine interest in understanding his wife's achievements, rather than simply defending his own position. Summit Digital Solutions invests heavily in employee development, Kevin replied, consulting notes he'd taken during his crash course in the company's operations. They offer tuition reimbursement for relevant coursework, mentorship programs that pair junior employees with senior staff, and clear advancement pathways based on demonstrated competence rather than tenure or personal connections. The contrast with Pinnacle's previous practices couldn't have been starker. Where Pinnacle had limited professional development opportunities and unclear promotion criteria, Summit offered structured growth paths and substantial investment in employee capabilities. Amanda Brooks appeared in the conference room doorway, her designer outfit and perfectly styled hair making her stand out among the more casually dressed Pinnacle employees. Her presence created immediate tension, as everyone understood that she was Tyler's wife and might be there to continue his disruptive efforts. "Kevin," Amanda said, her voice carrying a mixture of hurt and accusation. "Tyler says you knew about Rachel's company all along and helped plan his firing. Is that true?" The question was obviously loaded, designed to create doubt about Kevin's honesty and integrity. Amanda's tone suggested she genuinely believed Tyler's version of events, demonstrating how quickly false narratives could take root when people preferred comfortable lies to uncomfortable truths. Kevin's response was measured but firm. "That's Completely false. I learned about Rachel's company at the same time as everyone else this morning. Tyler was terminated because his performance doesn't meet professional standards, not because of any personal conspiracy. Amanda's expression shifted from accusatory to confused as she processed Kevin's unambiguous denial. But Tyler said you must have known. He said there's no way someone could hide a successful business from their spouse for 4 years. The comment inadvertently highlighted one of the most painful aspects of the situation for Kevin. Amanda was essentially arguing that his ignorance of Rachel's success proved either complicity in deception or fundamental failure as a husband to pay attention to his wife's actual activities. "Tyler is wrong," Kevin replied simply. "I didn't know because I made assumptions about my wife's capabilities based on outdated gender stereotypes and personal insecurities. I saw what I expected to see rather than what was actually happening." The honesty of Kevin's self-assessment was startling in its completeness. Rather than making excuses or deflecting blame, he was taking full responsibility for his failure to recognize Rachel's achievements and the patterns of thinking that had made such blindness possible. Amanda's composure began to crack as she realized that Kevin's version of events was more credible than her husband's conspiracy theories. So Tyler really was terminated for poor performance? His promotion wasn't legitimate? Marcus Johnson stepped forward with Tyler's personnel file, offering to share relevant details with Amanda if she wanted to understand the objective basis for her husband's termination. The gesture was both professional and compassionate, providing her with factual information rather than leaving her to rely on Tyler's self-serving explanations. "Your husband's promotion was based on factors other than performance metrics," Marcus explained diplomatically. "The new ownership structure requires that all positions be justified by documented achievements and objective evaluation criteria." Amanda's face went pale as she absorbed the implications of Marcus's careful phrasing. Tyler's recent success, which had been the foundation of their enhanced social status and financial planning, was revealed as hollow achievement that couldn't survive professional scrutiny. "What does this mean for Tyler's career?" Amanda asked, her voice small and uncertain. "Mr. Brooks has received a generous severance package and comprehensive job placement assistance," Lisa replied professionally. "Summit Digital Solutions doesn't want to damage anyone's long-term prospects, but we also can't maintain employment for individuals whose performance doesn't meet our standards." The kindness embedded in the firm message seemed to provide some comfort to Amanda. While Tyler's termination was non-negotiable, the company wasn't trying to destroy his future opportunities or create unnecessary hardship for his family. As Amanda left the conference room to process this new information, Kevin addressed the remaining employees with renewed confidence. The confrontation had tested his commitment to truth over social harmony, and his consistent support for professional standards had demonstrated genuine growth. "I want everyone to understand that today's changes represent an opportunity rather than a threat," Kevin continued. "Summit Digital Solutions offers the kind of professional environment that most of us have wanted at Pinnacle but never experienced. Merit-based advancement, comprehensive development opportunities, and a culture that values diverse perspectives and innovative thinking." Jennifer Walsh smiled for the first time that morning, clearly energized by the prospect of working in an environment where her contributions might finally be recognized and rewarded. "When do we learn about specific role changes and development opportunities?" "Individual meetings begin Monday morning," Marcus replied. "Everyone will receive detailed information about their transition path and future prospects with the merged organization. The process is designed to be transparent and supportive, even when difficult changes are necessary." As employees began to disperse, returning to their desks with a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation, Kevin approached me with an expression that combined vulnerability with determination. "I need to ask you something," Kevin said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of 4 years of accumulated misunderstanding. "When you decided to keep your company secret, was it because you thought I couldn't handle your success, or because you didn't want to share that part of your life with me? The question went to the heart of our relationship's fundamental problems. Kevin was asking whether my deception had been protective or exclusionary, whether I'd been shielding him from difficult truths or simply choosing to live separate lives. Both, I admitted, the honesty painful but necessary. Initially, I was protecting what I thought was a fragile relationship from my success. But over time, the separation became easier than the vulnerability of sharing my real challenges and achievements with someone who might not understand or appreciate them. Kevin nodded slowly, absorbing the complexity of motivations that had driven my choices. So it wasn't just about my ego or insecurities. You also stopped trusting me with the important parts of your life. The insight was perceptive and accurate. My deception had been both defensive and offensive, protecting Kevin from truths he might not handle well, while also protecting myself from the risk of vulnerability and potential rejection. The question now, I said, is whether we can build something authentic from this point forward, or whether too much damage has been done to create a genuine partnership. Kevin considered this carefully before responding. I think we have to try. Not because of our marriage vows or social expectations, but because the people we really are might actually be compatible in ways the people we were pretending to be never could have been. The suggestion that our authentic selves might be more compatible than our performed versions was intriguing and hopeful. Perhaps the very differences that had driven us to deception could become sources of mutual strength and growth. Over the following weeks, Kevin and I began the delicate process of rebuilding our relationship on foundations of honesty rather than comfortable fiction. The process was neither smooth nor certain, requiring both of us to abandon familiar patterns and embrace uncomfortable truths about ourselves and each other. Kevin's transition at work proved challenging but ultimately successful. His technical skills translated well to Summit Digital Solutions' more demanding environment, while his newfound commitment to collaborative leadership gradually earned him respect from colleagues who had initially been skeptical about his motives and capabilities. The changes in Kevin's approach to our marriage were equally dramatic. Instead of offering unwanted advice about business strategy, he began asking thoughtful questions about my actual challenges and achievements. Rather than assuming he knew what was best for my career development, he started listening to my perspectives and supporting my decisions. Most significantly, Kevin began his own journey of professional and personal growth. He enrolled in leadership development courses, sought mentorship from successful women in our industry, and actively worked to examine and change the gender-based assumptions that had limited his effectiveness as both a colleague and a husband. The social consequences of Tyler's termination and our revelation created predictable complications. Some mutual friends chose sides based on incomplete information, while others gradually came to understand the complex realities that had driven our choices. Amanda and Tyler eventually moved to Houston, where Tyler found a position with a smaller agency that valued his networking skills over performance metrics. 6 months after the acquisition, Summit Digital Solutions and the former Pinnacle Marketing Group had successfully integrated into a stronger organization that combined the best elements of both companies. Employee satisfaction scores reached all-time highs, client retention improved dramatically, and revenue growth exceeded our most optimistic projections. More importantly for Kevin and me, we had begun to discover who we might be as authentic partners rather than performers in an elaborate deception. The process wasn't always comfortable, but it was honest in ways our marriage had never been before. One evening, as we sat in our living room discussing the day's events with the kind of genuine communication that had been absent from our relationship for years, Kevin made an observation that captured the transformation we'd both experienced. "You know," he said, looking up from the business journal he'd been reading, "I used to think success meant being the smartest person in the room. Now I realize it might mean being brave enough to learn from people who know more than you do." The insight represented a fundamental shift in Kevin's worldview, from competitive insecurity to collaborative growth. It was exactly the kind of change that made our future together seem not just possible, but potentially remarkable. And I used to think love meant protecting people from difficult truths, I replied. Now I think it might mean trusting them to handle reality, even when that reality is complicated or challenging. As we continued building our relationship on foundations of mutual respect and authentic communication, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. The deception that had nearly destroyed our marriage had also created the crisis necessary for genuine growth and change. The lazy housewife was gone forever, replaced by a woman who owned her achievements and demanded recognition for her capabilities. The condescending husband had evolved into a partner who could celebrate his wife's success without feeling diminished by it. Our story wasn't a fairy tale ending, but something more valuable. A realistic foundation for building a marriage between two people who finally saw each other clearly and chose to love what they found. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.